Welcome into the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Pod. Nick Whalen, Alex Barutha here with you as we are every Monday through the NBA season and, of course, into the playoffs. Alex, we made it. We survived I wouldn't say all that chaotic regular season, to be honest. I mean, there's a lot still to be decided going into Sunday, but injury-wise, fantasy-wise, it was smoother sailing overall than these last few years that have been so injury-riddled. We'll give our final parting thoughts on the fantasy season as the pod goes along. Of course, talk about the play-in matchups, talk about the playoff matchups that we know that are officially locked in each conference. But starting with Sunday's slate, Alex, I don't think we need to do like a full recap here because so many of these games were completely meaningless. But the final day of the season delivered, man. We had a Delano Banton 0 of 15 from 3, and then an ejection. I mean, just the best way possible to end your season if you're the Blazers, like losing by 40 to the Kings. We saw point Bates at the end of that Cavs game as they desperately tried to take their way into a first-round matchup against the Orlando Magic. The New York Knicks are our 2 seed all of a sudden in the Eastern Conference. We get the resumption of the Bucks-Pacers rivalry, which probably peaked in like mid-January, and those teams have not played each other since. But a lot to get to as we look ahead to the play-in tournament, which starts tomorrow night.
Yeah, I'm really excited for especially the Western Conference play-in tournament. But these playoffs overall are going to be a lot of fun, man. It was a great season. Yep. I think, like you mentioned, and it's something we have touched on before. But this feels like the first. I don't want to say the first normal season since all the COVID stuff, but it feels to me like the first really great season in terms of so many guys stayed healthy. The schedule's all normal. The NBA implemented some new stuff with the play-ins in full effect. That they did the in-season tournament. This sort of feels like a true, almost resumption of like what the NBA used to be before all COVID hit.
I think that's the perfect way to phrase it, and I feel the exact same way because we've had 2 quote unquote or 3 I guess now normal NBA finals since the bubble, but this felt like we're back, right? We a lot of things coming out of COVID I think had plagued the NBA, specifically players resting and all these guys missing time, and some of that it's like LeBron, for example, 2 fluky injuries in 2 consecutive years. I don't think I'm not of the belief that the 65 game minimum just magically solved that. I think that was part of it, right? I think we certainly saw players take fewer games off. But I think we just had, in general, pretty good injury luck, right? And if you're somebody who has Joel Embiid or LaMelo Ball in fantasy, you're shaking your head like, what are you talking about? I don't think we had good injury luck. But that was, I was talking with our guy Dan Titus last night from Yahoo, and we were just kind of going back and forth about our fantasy seasons. And I told him, I think the single biggest mistake I made, other than drafting LaMelo Ball in multiple leagues, was fading some of these players who had missed time over the last few years and who we thought were, best case scenario, they're fighting to get to 65 games. That's LeBron, that's Anthony Davis, that's Paul George, that's Kawhi Leonard, that's Kevin Durant, somebody I was completely fading in the first half of round 1 because I just didn't like the health track record. The NBA is significantly more fun when almost all the big name players are healthy for the season, right? And that's what gets us the results that we have, right? I mean, that's why the LA Lakers are the 8 seed. That's why the Warriors are the 10 seed. Really, I think Memphis is the team that you would point to most as, okay, injuries just completely derailed their season. There's nothing they could do about it. Nobody thinks that they're the 13th best team in the Western Conference, but we had so many teams and so many players stay healthy this season that I think that really fed into the amount of parity that we feel like we have in both conferences.
It did. I mean, this was a really interesting draft season in terms of, like you mentioned, I was scared to draft a lot of these guys too who had injury concerns, and I was just looking farther down the board. Like Kevin Durant might be available for you at 9, but then you're like, well, I could just take Trae Young. He's probably not going to get hurt and might end up having like a similar fantasy season. And I feel like we're going to get a lot of this next year as well as sort of. I think this upcoming fantasy season. I know I'm kind of shifting the subject here, but I think next year's drafts are going to be maybe the most fascinating and most difficult top. I mean, you could just say top 12 first round, but maybe the top first 2 rounds of fantasy NBA that we have ever seen. And some of that starts with Victor Wembanyama at the top, yes, but a lot of that other stuff starts with the sort of old NBA guard, getting older and maybe people still being concerned about injuries, Embiid, for example. And so many of these other guys, Halliburton, SGA, even LaMelo, sort of like rising up. It's going to be really tough to make a lot of those decisions in the first 2 rounds.
It's a good and a bad problem, right? I mean, the good side of this is we have so much talent that you feel like you can't really go wrong in the first 2 rounds. I would say even further. I mean, you could really get into, rounds 3 and 4 and you're still landing like perennial all-star type of players, but it's going to be a minefield, right? And that's what worries me is like I feel like I picked the wrong year to fade LeBron and fade Paul George and fade Kawhi. And now, do you go into next year just being like, well, Kevin Durant stayed healthy. I guess now I feel comfortable taking him at 6. Like I feel like I need to stick to that process. And of course, you don't want to get burned on it again, but yeah, it's really tough, man. And you look at the top of the board, obviously, Wembanyama, Jokic. I know you wrote up a piece for the site last week, kind of taking a look at what that early first round might look like next year, and you had Jokic and Wembanyama on their own tier at the top. I agree with you on that, especially if Luka Doncic is just like permanently a 78% guy from the free throw line. Kind of looks like Giannis is permanently going to be a 65% guy at the line. I mean, those two are the most bulletproof, I think, in terms of fantasy. SGA is not going anywhere. Then you get into that secondary tier, and I think that's where those decisions have to be made, right? And I think that starts with Joel Embiid first and foremost, right? I mean, he's the guy that we had these concerns going in. The injury obviously ends up manifesting itself, but he was so dominant when he was healthy that there's still going to be people in your league that are happily taking him not only in the first round, but I think we'll see him go in the top 5 in some leagues.
I do want to mention, I think that article you're referring to is actually written by Alex Raclean.
Oh, no.
The other Alex. Yeah.
Oh boy, I just saw the Alex. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to you.
No, you're good.
Well.
But I actually did contribute to a first round. By Adam King put together like a cumulative mock like first round. Asked a bunch of people from around the industry, and I contributed to that one. I think I had Wembanyama 4th, but that might be too low. I mean, that's the lowest I think he's going to go in any draft. Yes. But yeah, you mentioned it with Embiid, because I remember last year, and I wasn't doing this, but plenty of other people were like, coming off his MVP season, he played 66 games after he played 68 the year before, and people were like, well, he's not injury prone anymore. Mm-hmm. It's like, because he sort of had 2 healthy seasons. So you have to be careful about this kind of stuff too, because because we saw some of these guys play, like one fluke injury season for players can be, you can look at it the reverse way. Like some guy can have a fluky injury season where he misses Karl Anthony Towns or something. Someone can be healthy for a long time and then they get hurt, whatever. But I think I'm going to be really, really interested to see what people do with LaMelo Ball next year. Mm-hmm. I would say my concern is that like, I'm starting to get a little concerned, but if he's there for me at like 14, it's going to be really hard for me not to take him. I've heard people say, no, I'm done with him. I'm not drafting him until the 2nd round. He's been amazing when he's been on the court. And I think some of these injuries, maybe he sat out a little longer than he had to. Will that change next year? Will the Hornets actually be better? I don't know. But
I'm not saying I'm swearing him off, but I'm close. I'm very close. I don't think I would take him in the 2nd round, mostly because there are so many other appealing options that I don't feel like I'm leaving that much upside on the table. It's like, yes, a best case LaMelo Ball season is better than a best case Devin Booker season or, DeJounte Murray. I know he finished in the top 25. Just looking at guys like that, he's not necessarily a 2nd round pick, but I'm scared, man. I'm scared. I don't think Charlotte's going to be that much better next year. I think if you even put the injury concerns aside and as you implied, it's like, could he have come back if this team, wasn't 20-62? Yeah, maybe he would, but do we expect him to be that much better next year? I'm not really sure if I do. I don't know where those reinforcements are coming from, and unless they really hit it on the free agent market, which I just don't think is all that realistic. Let's talk a little bit about the series. We'll get right into it. We got a comment from our guy Matt. He says, "What's up, guys? I'm a little worried for our Bucks." Yeah, I would be too, man. There's been a bit of a reversal. I think it was last Thursday. We had an update from Chris Haynes. He was on his podcast saying that the Bucks were optimistic. Giannis would be back for game 1. And then early this morning, Shams Charania notes that it's maybe closer to doubtful as far as Giannis goes for game 1. It's hard to say either way. I think Giannis is such a unique case. I think he's like the number 1 guy who would in the NBA who would push to return for a game one, but obviously Milwaukee wants to be cautious. We talked about it last week. The number one thing you need to avoid is a re-injury and what would likely be a more severe injury, with that calf. I do think Milwaukee ended up getting a decent matchup. Now, yesterday's game, a little disheartening, for Damian Lillard to basically play his worst game of the year going into the playoffs. That was not ideal. You lose to a Magic team that you just beat earlier in the week, but ultimately, I think landing at the 3 and matching up against Indiana, I'm okay with that if I'm the Bucks. I still think you'd prefer Orlando as your first round opponent. I think Cleveland would be acceptable, but if you're preparing to go into a series, let's say with the first 2 games, you don't have Giannis Antetokounmpo, I would rather take my chances against Indiana in that scenario than I would Miami or Philly.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I would say that I am fairly worried.
Yeah.
Even if Giannis was healthy, I think I would pick the Bucks to win, and maybe they could win in 5, but I would not have like ultimate confidence about it. And I want to set the scene a little bit too. Milwaukee on the seasons or on the series betting wise, -175, Pacers +140. The closest thing to that on the board right now is Cavs Magic with Cavs at -195 and Magic at +165. This is at DraftKings. If there's real doubt, like Sham said about Giannis not playing in game 1, or what I'm trying to say, real strong chance he does not take the court in game 1. I think the Bucks really need to win that game. I think if you give Indy the edge in game 1 and then you split game 2, I think the Bucks would probably just lose game 3 in Indy, and then you're down 2-1 already to a team that clearly has your number, and none of your defensive problems got fixed. And I think Milwaukee has the potential to be a better playoff team than a regular season team because I think they can be more flexible in their defense. I think you can adjust on the fly, stuff like that, as opposed to staying in your one rigid defense that never changes. But it would not shock me. It just wouldn't if the Bucks lost in the first round.
No, it certainly, nobody could sit here and say it would shock them if they lost, right? There's been no confidence here with Milwaukee, even with Giannis healthy. And, I think you put the Giannis injury on top of this. Obviously, he was injured for part of round 1 last year. That's what, in part led to that series loss to Miami. I do think it's interesting. Milwaukee's -175 on the series price right now at DraftKings. Indy +140 to win the series. They were -250 yesterday when I was looking into this, probably around 7 p.m. Central, I would say, on Sunday. And I think that dropped in light of the Giannis news. It was off the board for a few hours this morning. Now it's back up at -175. I mean, my pick right now, assuming Giannis is back at some point in the series, I'm not saying this just because I'm a Bucks fan, it would be Bucks in 6. It would. But I think you're right. I think it's important. Obviously, you want to win game 1. Everybody wants to win game 1. You can't go down 0-2. That's for sure. I think you at least need a split. And again, if we're saying Giannis is sitting those first 2 games, just throwing that out there, you got to split. You cannot say, all right, we're down 0-2, but Giannis is coming back for game 3, and we'll just we'll take 4 of the next 5. Like that's, I don't know. I think that's a pretty dangerous way to live in the NBA postseason. So overall, I think the Bucks came out okay. Like, do you agree with me that Indy's the matchup that you would want based on how things ended up shaking out on Sunday? And you got to keep in mind that all these games were stacked concurrently, right? Like you can only do so much in terms of scoreboard watching and adjusting on the fly.
So, I think if I'm Milwaukee, I think I actually would have rather played Orlando. Not because I necessarily think. I think it's because the Bucks' main issues are defensively, and Indiana is a way better offensive team than Orlando. I think Indiana is going to be a better team in terms of exploiting what the Bucks are bad at, which is just playing a very rigid defensive style and not having the backcourt personnel to deal with a great point guard in Tyrese Halliburton. Meanwhile, the Magic are a better defensive team. The Bucks' problem's not really on like scoring on other teams, and like yes, they go into some bad slumps, and Dame hasn't had as many explosive performances as he had in the past, and Giannis still has his issues turning the ball over and whatever. I think I would have rather played Orlando because I think their best players are sort of stacked on the wing and at the forward, and the Bucks are best guarding there. Now they got smoked the other night against Orlando, right?
Yeah.
but I think I would have rather played Orlando actually.
I think that's fair. I think Orlando and Indy, those two are fairly interchangeable for me. I think I'm with you. I'm trying to like do the mental math here, which is not my strong suit in any way, as to whether that was like a realistic possibility. As far as like had Milwaukee won, could they have faced Orlando? I think, I mean, the Magic could have slid all the way down to the 8 yesterday. So I'm not even sure if that was, necessarily an outcome that was possible. But yeah, either way, I think, I mean, Orlando, and this is the rub for Cleveland. And I think part of the reason that they went point Bates and made sure that they were playing the Orlando Magic in round 1 is, yeah, for as scary as Banchero is, and for as well coached as the Magic are, there's not a great track record of teams like this who have been down for so long, who have no playoff experience. Obviously, they've had a great year, but you step into the playoffs for the first time, and you typically don't win that series when you're a team like Orlando. I think OKC, somewhat of a comparable situation out west. A lot more talent there, right? That's a little bit different. Orlando has one all-star caliber player, one maybe borderline all-star in Franz, and then the rest of the roster is fine, but you're basically getting maximum achievement out of everybody on that roster this season. So I do think Orlando is probably the weakest link among the non-play-in teams, and maybe of what will ultimately be all 8 playoff teams in the East. So I think Cleveland. Did you have a problem with what Cleveland did? I was listening. I think it was Tim Bontemps on the ESPN pod. Could not believe it. Could not believe it. Hated the lack of competitiveness from the Cleveland Cavaliers. I will say I don't have a problem with this. If you have a matchup and you want it, go for it.
I'm with you on that. I don't really care that team's matchup hunt or throw games for the last game of the season. I don't really care. I mean, you should be more mad about what Toronto did. You should be more mad about what you could pick out a 3, 4, 5 teams in the NBA that you should have more of a problem with than what Cleveland did, trying to lose a game by giving Imani Bates some point guard minutes for him for fun and for the crowd, who I'm sure was there partially knew that they were going to see some Imani Bates point guard action. But in terms of Cleveland, Orlando, I mean, Cleveland is a really confusing team to me for a lot of reasons. I mean, they had a stretch, like the middle of the year for Cleveland was awesome. December, January, February, they were cooking even with the guys out. And I think people forget, Orlando started the season really hot and they ended the season pretty hot. In the middle, they were not that good. I mean, December they went 6-8, January they went 6-10. So both these teams have had their ups and downs. But yeah, if I'm Cleveland, I'm fine going up against Orlando because just like I was talking about when I was talking about Orlando versus the Bucks, the Magic's best player, Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner, who are forwards. And if you are if you're Cleveland, we're like, well, look, we have Evan Mobley who can go out on the perimeter against Paolo. We have and Mobley can go out on the perimeter against Franz if we need him. They can both protect the rim, him and Jared Allen. And Orlando can't shoot threes. So we can just sit Mobley and Allen in the paint. We can dare guys to shoot. We can switch off of guard actions. We have a Coro who can really bother like Fultz or Suggs if one of those guys gets hot. So I think it's going to be a really tough matchup for Orlando. And look, I love the Magic. I would not be surprised if they got swept. I'm going to be honest. I don't think they will, but 4 games would not surprise me.
Yeah, I think the series starting in Cleveland is big. I would be very surprised if Orlando's able to, steal both of those games. Maybe you get one. Cleveland in 5, Cleveland in 6, to me is probably the most likely outcome. I mean, talent-wise, I think you could argue that the Cavs have, I don't know, maybe as many as 4 of the top 5 players in the series, certainly 4 of the top 6. I think with the Cavs, like you said, they've been confusing, right? Like they clearly have not played up to their ability. The Garland-Mitchell pairing just hasn't really come to fruition in the way that we thought it would. Evan Mobley, kind of the same guy that he was a year ago, 2 years ago. And, he has not blossomed quite into the player that we thought he would be. Still a very good player, but not the next Kevin Garnett, the way it looked like it might be going early in his rookie season. But yeah, the Cavs should be able to take care of business here. There's a reason they wanted this matchup. Now, I think the other silver lining, about Milwaukee, staying in the 2-3 spot here, and one, you dodge Miami or Philly in round 1, which I think was probably something that deep down, whether they wanted to lose that game on Sunday or not, something that was in the back of Milwaukee's mind. The other thing is when you're the 2 or the 3, you're on the opposite side of the bracket as Boston, right? So if Milwaukee could get by Indiana in round 1, you're getting the winner of that Knicks and then Philly-Miami series, which is not going to be easy by any means. And that's kind of a across that bridge when you get there situation. But I think the hope if you're Milwaukee is you survive round one, you get Giannis back to where he needs to be, you go into round two at full strength, and I think any of those three teams are an acceptable opponent if you're Milwaukee. Like looking ahead, let's say they beat Indiana, who would your preferred opponent be between the Knicks, the Sixers, and the Heat?
I think the Heat, because my assumption is going to be if the 76ers win the play-in and they beat New York, that Embiid is like completely healthy and dominant, and that I would be scared of.
Yeah.
But if Miami emerges, yes, the Bucks have a lot of history with Miami, and that is a little scary. But New York, man, how much more can we really say about New York? They're having the season of their lives. I mean, like, they got OG available, like Randall not available. Yeah, that I think that hurts their ceiling, but they have been plenty fine without him for like the entire season. And I think they have the personnel to give the Bucks problems. They have guards, they have McBride, they have DiVincenzo that they can throw at Lillard, they have OG who they can put on Giannis, and Mitchell Robinson and Hartenstein are probably going to could give problems to Brook Lopez. Lopez never gets in the lane anyway. But yeah, I think I'd prefer to face the Heat as partially. That's kind of blasphemous to say as a Bucks fan, but that's just how I feel.
Well, for the second straight year, I mean, it's not like Miami's given us any reason to think you shouldn't want to play them, right? I mean, but we're at the point now where like it doesn't even matter. Like, I mean, you forget last year they lost the play-in. They lost their first play-in game, right? I mean, they lost to the Hawks and then had to play their way in the do or die just to get to that round one series against Milwaukee. So I don't care what Miami's done in the regular season. I know it's probably lazy analysis in some ways, but they've already shown us like 2 of the last 3 years that it simply does not matter what this team looks like in the regular season. So I'm with you. I mean, I think you want to avoid Miami, and the Knicks are in some ways, I think, a bad matchup for Milwaukee. I think they don't have depth, but I don't think that really matters in the playoffs. I think we know who the 6.5, 7 guys are who are going to play 38 to 44 minutes every single night for Tibbs come the postseason. And I don't know. I mean, Jalen Brunson has been a significantly better player than Damian Lillard for most of the season. That's what would worry me is if I'm Milwaukee, I'm not confident that Damian Lillard is winning that head-to-head matchup with Jalen Brunson over the course of a series.
You're right about that. I think the upside is neither player can guard each other, but the Knicks do have more options to throw at Damian Lillard than the Bucks have to throw at Brunson. Like, what are you really going to do against Brunson? The Bucks have not been able to guard guys like that all year, so that's going to create issues. And you're right, Tibbs has his guys, and their depth can be questionable at times. Milwaukee doesn't have good depth, and Milwaukee has the top end talent, but they've had the top end talent all year, and look where they are.
What worries me most, I think, about Milwaukee, outside of Damian Lillard not really looking like the Damian Lillard for 95% of this season, and other than Giannis being injured, which are two pretty big question marks, I think their reliance on knockdown shooting from role players, which in the modern NBA, a lot of teams are reliant on that. But the nights where Milwaukee looks really bad are the nights where Damian Lillard is 2 of 10 from 3, and Malik Beasley is 1 of 8 from 3, and Pat Connaughton is 1 of 6 off the bench, right? And like that feels to me like it's swung more games than it should for them this year.
Yeah, and it's because I mean a lot of the players, almost all the Bucks role players do not play make, and they do not drive to the basket. And when they do drive to the basket, they're very uncomfortable. They're not great at driving hard and making shots at the basket. Right. It's Beasley doesn't want to do that. Beasley's not going to like pump drive and make something great happen. Crowder's too old to do that. Beverly is not going to make layups like that. And even Lillard is not exactly who he used to be finishing at the basket. So, the Bucks they get nothing in terms of secondary actions from their role players. It's a problem.
Yeah, they remind me a little bit of the Buffalo Bills this past year going into the playoffs. Where like we know the talent's there. We got to respect Josh Allen. I guess could happen, but the vibes just felt off all year. Just never. There was really never even like a 10-game stretch where you're like, all right, here comes Milwaukee, here we go, and they would put together 5 to 7 game stretches like that, but those would immediately be followed by like 2 consecutive disaster games that would seemingly wipe all that away. So I'm I'm as concerned as you are. I'm as concerned as our guy Matt Carmody is. Hard to have confidence in this Bucks team right now. Again, Milwaukee minus 175 on the series price. Cleveland minus 195, by the way, in that matchup against Orlando. Let's head out west and talk about those two series before we hit the play-in. We've known that we were staring down Clippers-Mavs for a while now. It became, mathematically a lock over the weekend. But these two teams have been circling each other for the last couple of weeks. Clippers settle at the 4 seed, Dallas the 5. This could be an all-time first-round matchup, Alex. I think the Clippers, you could argue at full strength, have maybe the slight talent advantage. Dallas has the continuity advantage. They're playing as well together as any team in the NBA. They're as hot as any team in the NBA coming in. They have the best player, in my mind, in Luka Doncic. Now, playoff Kawhi versus peak Luka, I think that's a debate. I'm still concerned about Kawhi, man. I'm really surprised that there has not been more discussion about this, right? I mean, outside of the fantasy world, it's like, is the average NBA fan aware that Kawhi Leonard missed the final 8 games of the regular season and is apparently just going to come back and play in the playoffs? Series price here makes sense. Minus 110 either way.
I thought you were going to say you were surprised that you hadn't heard more about Kawhi Leonard's injury. And I'm like, that should not surprise you. But yes, people are not talking about it. This series is really, like you said it. This is the most fascinating series to me because the Clippers still have the 4th best title odds, according to DraftKings, despite Kawhi Leonard not playing in April, and the team just not playing well at all for the last 15, 20 games of the season. And so I still can't be surprised if the Clippers pull this one out. I don't know who I'm picking yet. I feel like I have to go into a meditative zone and come out on the other side.
I'm picking Dallas. I'll tell you that.
Okay. I still don't know.
I'm falling for it. The Clippers have oddly become the zag here, right? Where everybody loves Dallas so much. It feels too good to be true. Maybe I'm rolling with the team that's played better. The team that we know their best player is healthy. I think you're asking a lot of Kawhi. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe this has just been some elongated ruse to get him at full strength for the playoffs. Who knows? But we've seen this before from him where even if he's technically healthy going into the playoffs, his body tends to break down. When you start asking him to play 40 minutes night in and night out, you're playing every other night. It has not gone well for him. And I think the other big part of this is James Harden, right? Great regular season player, turned in another top 25 fantasy season, just like you think he would when he's healthy. One of the worst, if not the worst, track records of playoff success of any Hall of Fame level player in NBA history. I would say it's probably the worst, right? So why does that all of a sudden change, right? Russell Westbrook is on this roster, another horrendous playoff performer. Paul George, not great in the playoffs historically throughout his career. He had some nice runs in Indiana. Other than that, it's been pretty rough. I see the talent with the Clippers. I get it. They're well coached when they're on. When did they have that run? Was that January where they just looked like the best team for a month and a half? I remember that. That makes sense. I'm not saying that doesn't count for anything, but there are a ton of question marks with this team.
Yeah, they had 5 combined losses in December and January. The Clippers did.
Yeah.
Everything you outlined is the reason that you and me and everyone else who is kind of wavering on this series should have doubt about the Clippers. I think the idea of all these guys together. Well, I shouldn't say all these guys. The idea of Paul George and James Harden sort of together as guys who are not great playoff performers is now there's less burden on them because the other one is there, right? So it's they were too far up the pecking order.
I guess.
And look, the Clippers are they're a deep team. They have different looks they can go to, right? And I think Westbrook has actually been kind of good for them. But yes, of course, the playoff issues. At the same time, I love what Dallas did at the deadline. It's paid off big time. I think to me, you could talk about Luka's and Kyrie's chemistry, and that's been good all year. But the Daniel Gafford addition, man, has been huge. And PJ Washington, good for adding size. I mean, they're going to probably try to throw PJ on Kawhi, I assume. I don't know if they'll try to do some. I'm curious if they'll just unleash Dante Exum on James Harden. I think that's kind of what they're going to try to do. I need to think more on it before I make a final decision. But I think the series being even in terms of the odds, is fine based on the talent level of both teams and what we've seen from them at different points.
I think how Dallas guards the Clippers is going to be really interesting. I think for LA, it's a little bit more straightforward, right? And I think you could argue there are a few teams that are better positioned to guard Luka specifically and Kyrie than the Clippers, right? I mean, you have all NBA caliber defender in Paul George. You have all world when healthy caliber defender in Kawhi. I mean, Terrence Mann, fine. They've been kind of stashing PJ Tucker all year. It's like that's somebody you can throw on Luka for a couple possessions, right? Like they have options there, but what you mentioned with Dallas, it's like, yeah, right. You throw PJ Washington on Kawhi. Where does Dante Exum fit? Where does that leave Luka, and where does that leave Kyrie defensively?
I think they probably try to throw Kyrie on Terrence Mann.
I think it's got to be,
just
yeah.
kind of have him do nothing. And Luka, I don't know.
Does he have to guard Harden?
Yeah, Luka. Yeah, maybe they do guard. I could see a lot of switching. I could see a lot of switching for Luka Doncic. Like it's sort of like the LeBron theory, where it's like whatever action Luka gets put in, the other defender next to him, it's his responsibility to do the hard part. That's how LeBron has been playing through stretches of the regular season as well. I think that's probably how they'll do a lot of switching with Luka and stuff like that.
Yeah, that one's going to be a banger. No question about it. Really excited for that. And I think the winner of that series has a pretty nice path, right? I think Denver falling to the 2, that really, really opens things up for the winner of this series, whether it's Dallas or the Clippers. And, we'll talk about how that affects the play-in tournament in a little bit. I think if you're the Lakers right now, you're like, man, we thought we did it. We thought we pulled it off. We thought we were going to get OKC, get the 7, and now they'll have some interesting decisions to make. But yeah, the winner of Clippers-Mavs, in all likelihood, gets OKC, and we'll see. I mean, that's not going to be a cakewalk, whether it's the Lakers, whether it's Golden State. I mean, even the Pelicans or the Kings. I mean, those are teams that can at least give you a run if you're the Thunder as that 1 seed. There are no cakewalks in the Western Conference. Let's talk about the other West series that we have locked in. That is the 3 seed Minnesota Timberwolves, who, of course, lost and tried to fight the Phoenix Suns yesterday, and the Phoenix Suns, who are your 6 seed. This is going to be another fantastic series, right? 2 teams that have a little bit of history against each other. I saw somebody reposted that video from like 3 years ago of Anthony Edwards, like watching the Suns lose by 40 to the Mavs and talking a little sauce their way. This is going to be fantastic, man. I will ask you point blank right away. Should the Phoenix Suns be favored to win the series? Because they are minus 115 at DraftKings. Timberwolves, a slight dog at minus 105.
I think I'm actually fine with that. Yeah. Because what Phoenix has done in April and even late March to get here, to move all the way up, has been great. And Timberwolves, look, Towns, he came back. He's back. That's nice. He's played 2 warm-up games, essentially.
Oh, these are the facts.
But these are I'm outlining a lot of facts, like AP News style. Karl Anthony Towns returned, played 28 minutes, and then he played 29 minutes. I'm a little bit worried, just in terms of if Minnesota will have the sort of firepower they need to deal with Phoenix. And, Minnesota's really good defensively. I mean, that's kind of where they've been making their bones, especially with Towns out. You gotta morph into a more defensive team. But someone's got to guard Beal and Booker, and it can only be one of Conley's got to deal with one of these guys. And I think that's going to be a problem. And you put Jaden McDaniels on Durant. I get that. But then Towns is, it's not going to be easy for Minnesota to defend.
I think this is going to be a really frustrating series because I'm frustrated with the Suns. Like they don't deserve to win the series, and yet I think
no, they don't.
I think they do. I think they win it. It's I mean, like you said, it's really simple analysis, but it's like one team has maybe the best ISO scorer ever in Kevin Durant. You have another guy who's basically carried teams through playoff series before in Booker. Beal's kind of the wild card. I mean, he looked great on Sunday, right? That was kind of a reminder game, I feel like, for Beal, and I think he needed that because a lot of the criticism around the Suns, in their low points over the last couple months has been, Bradley Beal not necessarily looking like himself. But again, you're asking him to be the third option. And I think Phoenix's depth issues, less of a concern in the postseason than they were during the regular season. It's a really tough landing spot here for Minnesota. And again, there was not going to be an easy series on the books. Like let's say Minnesota was the 2 and they get the Lakers in round 1. I don't know if the Lakers are favored, but it's close, and a lot of people would be picking the Lakers. So it's not like they fell into this like nightmare matchup. But I don't think there's a single team, including the Denver Nuggets, on the board who are like, hell yeah, give us the Phoenix Suns in round 1. Like I think the players know how good this team could be. I don't think anybody in the NBA is getting caught up on their regular season record.
I mean, a lot of the conversations we've had about Phoenix are the same conversations we have about the Lakers, which was like, why does this team look so average for like 25 game stretches? Like for a third of the season, the team just like looks average. They're not putting it together. And then they, at the very end of the season, it all comes together. Look how great they play. Look how ready all these guys look. And yeah, I mean, I think again, Minnesota's best quality is their defense right now. And you're going up against a team whose best quality is their offense in Phoenix. And there's going to be some problems there. And I think Phoenix, like, I think the thing that's honestly, you know, because you and I talk a lot about, we do the NBA show on Sirius XM, and we're doing daily matchups all the time, you know, seeing like outliers. What are these teams good at? What are these teams bad at? Etc. The thing Phoenix has really just kind of been bad at all year is they just turn the ball over too much. And I think during the playoffs, I think they just kind of, I think they just lock in. I think they clean that up a little bit. And, you know, on the other side of the ball, they also don't force a lot of turnovers. And I think they play more aggressive on that end of the court, you know, partially because of the officiating's different now. You're going to have more opportunities to do that. So I think their weaknesses are a lot easier to correct than Minnesota's weaknesses.
I'm going to give you like a first take, speak for yourself point here.
Okay.
This is the most important game 1. Minnesota has to win game 1. If they lose game 1, I think this could get out of hand in terms of, you know, their psyche, right? Like I think you're the home team. You're getting this game at home. You've had the best regular season that you've had in forever. The fans absolutely love this team. You have all this momentum. You have to win game 1.
I think you're right. I think you are right. I think this is the most important game 1. I think you could make an argument that whoever gets the Thunder, that could also be a really important game 1. And it's still pretty unclear who's going to get the Thunder, you know, as the 1 seed of the play-in teams. But, you know, if let's say it's the Warriors or the Lakers, you know, if either of those teams come out and win that game 1 in OKC, I think that could be big, especially how it's done. But I love your first take point. This is really important because the Suns could come out. Durant could hang like 40 on Jaden McDaniels. Towns could score like 8 points on 20% shooting, and then all of a sudden we're like, oh, it's happening again, you know?
Exactly. That's exactly the narrative you could see transpiring. Towns has like 3 fouls in the first 7 minutes. Somehow he's, you know, exasperated on the bench. Like he's getting barked at by Anthony Edwards. Like you can see it happen. We have seen it happen multiple times for this team. Rudy Gobert punched a guy last year. Punched a man. All right, I'm gonna give you the opening lines for game 1. We'll talk about those for a moment, and then we'll hit the play-in. Tell me if any of these jump out to you. Cavs -4.5, Timberwolves -1.5, Bucks -2, Clippers -2. I mean, kind of hard to argue with any of those, but anything really jump out?
No, I don't think any of those really jump out to me. I will say I don't really hate the idea of taking Pacers +2, but that's like not that big of a spread at all.
No.
I mean, all of these spreads are like, well, not all of them. The only spread that is not a 1 possession spread is Orlando Cleveland. Right. And like I said, I outlined why I think Cleveland's a really tough matchup for Orlando. Yeah.
I don't mind taking the Cavs -4.5 at home here. I'm a little low on this Orlando team in terms of, you know, playoff upside versus what they did in the regular season. But yeah, I mean, looking at those other ones, I mean, I would rather just take the Pacers money line at +110 than take them +2 at -110. It's like if this is a 1 possession game, to me, that's at least a 50-50. Maybe you give a slight edge to Milwaukee, but I think if the Pacers are keeping it that close, they're going to have a good chance to win that game. And obviously you could say the same thing about Dallas and Phoenix as underdogs. Let's go to the play-in tournament. So fun matchups here as well, with the exception of Hawks Bulls. My God. But we'll see. Hey, you know, maybe one of those teams finds their way in. We'll start with the games tomorrow. We got Lakers Pelicans in the early window. That is the battle for the 7 seed. And then we have Warriors Kings, which is the battle to get to the battle to play for the 8 seed.
Are you with me where you just think it's just Lakers and Warriors both win these games?
Yeah. I do think the fact that the Lakers are 1-point dogs is interesting based on
It
the fact
is.
that they completely dominated the Pels yesterday. And this is a matchup that they, I think, really embrace and have, for the most part, been on the right side of over the last couple of years. I think there's some AD on the injury report, kind of
Right.
static here. And I mean, AD himself said there's no way in hell I'm not playing on Tuesday. So normally when you get something like that, it's not really factored into the line. I would be pretty surprised if the Lakers don't close as favorites by this time tomorrow.
I agree. I don't really that line of all the lines on the board. You asked me about the games that are set. This one to me feels the weirdest. Like I feel like the Lakers should just be favored, partially because they are the Lakers and they'd probably get market either way. But I think the Lakers, like you mentioned, what they did to them the other day, they've done well against them in the in-season tournament. And the Kings. Look, the Kings have been good, but they needed Malik Monk. I think they really really needed Malik Monk and Keon Ellis and Davion Mitchell. Like it's you go more defensively. That's great, but I think just in terms of they become a little too one-dimensional to me with Fox and Sabonis.
Yeah.
There's nobody else on that team who I really trust offensively. So I'm just going to lean Warriors because Warriors have played really well lately.
Yeah, I mean it feels so lame to say, but there's something to be said for the Warriors infrastructure. I mean, no team has
Yeah.
been through more battles together than the Warriors, and like it would be pretty shocking to me if this kind of era, it seems like it comes to an end, fizzling out as the 10 seed in a playing game to Sacramento. It's like this should be a pretty good matchup for them. It's a team they just beat in a series last year, right? So I would be pretty surprised if Golden State doesn't win that game. I think another thing that's interesting, and I don't know if I'd go as far as to say this is factored into the line, but it's something that crossed my mind. I'll admit it. It's something that Mike Greenberg got cooked for on Twitter earlier today for even suggesting. But far and away, the best matchup to me, if you're the LA Lakers, is the Oklahoma City Thunder. That's the team you feel the best, I think, about beating in round one. It's not Denver. Maybe it's Minnesota, but it's certainly not Denver. And you win this game, you're playing Denver. Would the Lakers be? Is there an argument that they would want to thread the needle here? You want to lose this game and then win the 8 seed game. Like I don't think you could do that. I think it's too risky in a 1-game setting. But if you're playing the matchups, if that's really what you care about, I think there's at least a discussion here.
I think should they want to? Yes. Should they? No. Should they try this? I don't think so, because they also play first, so they can't. Yeah, so they can't.
I was thinking about
that.
Like they should flip that.
Oh, they should. Yeah. It'd be awesome if Silver was like, you know what? I actually think we're gonna change the start times of these games.
Yeah.
We'll have Warriors Kings first. I don't know if they would do that, but having Warriors Kings first would definitely change the dynamic a little bit.
Yeah.
I think LA's got to try to win this game. But I agree with you. I mean, if you're picking between who you want to face between Denver and OKC, you got to want to face OKC. So
the Lakers would win that series. I'll say it right now. Lakers would win that series. OKC is a terrible matchup for the Lakers.
They are. Yeah, cuz Lakers have a ton of size and a ton of experience. And OKC is the exact opposite.
None of that whatsoever.
None of that.
From like a philosophical standpoint, you see this every postseason and really in any sport. There's kind of like the prolonging the inevitable thing, right? Of like, you want to be on the other side of Boston, or you want to avoid Denver until later. I think the number one point for that is, you just want to make your season look better. It looks better to lose in the West Finals if you're the Lakers, like you did last year, than losing in round one. But is there any advantage to that? Is it as simple as you're giving somebody more opportunities to potentially get injured before that series? I don't really know what the other argument is, because if you're the Lakers, I think you're expecting that you're going to have to get through Denver at some point. So is there an argument for like, hey, if we got to play him at some point, we might as well just play him right away?
I mean, I think in theory, you want to go into the NBA Finals as fresh as possible. So if you get your toughest matchup out of the way in the first round or something, I don't want to say you can coast, but relatively speaking, you are probably going to take down the opponent later in the playoffs in fewer games. and it should be easier overall. The whole matchup should be easier. So then in theory, you'd be a little more rested heading into the NBA Finals than you would be if you had to play the Nuggets heading into the NBA Finals or the Thunder or one of these other top seeds or Boston or whoever side of the bracket you're on. I think that's the argument for trying to face that team early.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And excuse me, I'm still a little bit under the weather here. So if the winner of that series, let's say the Lakers take care of business, they beat the Pelicans. I will say it started to feel like a little like everybody's like, oh, Lakers will just breeze right through. I don't think it's going to be that easy. I think it's pretty tough to dominate a team twice in 3 days. Like the Lakers just did on Sunday. Like I don't think the Pelicans are just going to lay down here. Would not be surprised at all if they win that game or it's close. And knowing the Lakers, they're going to find a way to kind of mess around and make this harder than it should be. But if we get Denver Lakers in round one, I would expect Denver to win that series. That would then set them up against the winner of Minnesota and Phoenix, which I don't know if there's really that advantageous of a path in the West, like other than Clippers-Mavs, like the winner of that potentially getting OKC. I think you feel good about that. Even if OKC were to lose in catastrophic fashion to like Golden State in round one, like I think the Clippers and the Mavs still feel okay about playing this version of the Warriors. But Minnesota or Phoenix in round two, whether it's Denver or the Lakers or whoever, that's not a series that you're necessarily looking forward to either. So I do think like the Minnesota Phoenix winner, it's not going to be one and done. Like I think there's going to be real competitive series to be had here in round two.
Phoenix has played Denver pretty well.
Yeah.
At times throughout the season, and we know Minnesota at least has the size to compete with Denver, the size and the physicality to deal with them. So I think that'd be a good series. Denver's they're such a well-oiled machine that I can't say that it would shock me that if they won one of those series in 5 games. But both of those series feel like they could more like a 6-game series where I would favor Denver between either of those teams, and some of it depends. Some of it depends on how the matchup goes. Between who emerges and how. If it's a grind out 7-game series between Phoenix and the Timberwolves, then it's going to be, I think, tougher to play the Nuggets. But if, like, let's say the Suns win in 5 and they get a bunch of rest and they're cooking offensively and they finally look like a well-oiled machine, then the matchup is going to get a little more interesting against Denver, because you don't want to go into Denver tired.
Right.
That's where the problems really start to add up.
I think we forget last year too. I mean, Phoenix was 2-2 against the Nuggets after falling. Mm-hmm. They dropped the first 2 games of the series, won the next 2. I mean, that series truly could have gone either way at that point. And they won a game 4 against Denver with Cam Payne and Josh Okogie in the starting lineup, and DeAndre Ayton dominating for that matter. Like Chris Paul was injured in that series. Obviously, they didn't have Bradley Beal. They didn't have Nurkic. Like I think you could argue, for as like weird and somewhat disappointing as the Sun season has been, like I think this team is better built for the playoffs than last year's team was, and they didn't completely roll over. I mean, they ended up losing the series in 6, but it wasn't like it was just completely one-sided. Denver blew them out of the water. So I think there's reason to believe the Suns can hang around there. Let's talk Eastern Conference play-in quick. Have you looked at the lines for these games yet?
I have it up, yeah.
Okay, all right. I was going to have you guess, but we got the Sixers as 4.5-point home favorites against Miami. The Bulls 3-point home favorites against Atlanta. We'll start with Miami Philly. Fascinating game for a million reasons. Both of these teams talent-wise don't really feel like they should be in the play-in. Maybe that mirrors the West in some ways. I think would be pretty shocking if both of these teams aren't ultimately in the playoff field.
Yes. I do like Philly in that game. Embiid, it's kind of been a mixed bag with Embiid because he's putting up huge numbers, and the 76ers, I think, have won 8 in a row. What is it since he came back? But he's kind of been, sometimes it feels like he's lumbering, and he's just, he takes some weird falls, and he looked like he got hurt again.
Yep.
So I don't think it's possible Miami wins this game. I mean, based on their history, we could say stuff like that all day. But at Chicago, Atlanta, I'm picking Chicago in that one. Atlanta at least has Trae Young back, and they don't have Jalen Johnson, which definitely hurts them. Atlanta's a team where they looked against Boston last year. They had some moments like when they get hot offensively, they could just get hot and beat the Bulls. It's just that simple. That's how much offensive firepower they have, especially with Trae Young running the show. But so let's say Philly wins and Chicago wins. Miami's obviously going to be favored against Chicago.
I was going to ask you what you think the number is. I mean, I think it's definitely lower if they're playing Miami versus Philly. It's like Philly might be favored by like, I don't know, 8.5,
Sure.
maybe more. I mean, because obviously they'd be coming off of like a weird loss. So I don't know how that would factor in, but yeah, I don't know if I don't know if Chicago even wins this game. By the way, like I don't think they should be 3-point favorites. I know they're at home. I think Atlanta's the team with the more upside, right? I think if both teams play their best game, I think Atlanta wins. You could argue that maybe Chicago has a slightly higher floor, but Atlanta definitely has the best player and has, somebody who's in the mix for the second best player in DeJounte Murray. Yeah, I don't, I mean, there's really no way to sit here and be like, here's what's going to happen in Hawks Bulls.
Right.
Like, this is just a weird game. Who knows? But it's going to be, like, I'm not really excited for that game. I'm excited for the next one. Like, the loser of Miami Philly, like, back against the wall, like, you better not lose this game. Like, you should win. It shouldn't be that tough. And you know it's going to be a little bit tighter than it should be.
Yeah, I mean, I want both Philly and Miami to be in the playoffs. Obviously, I just think it's not as fun. I think it's just not as fun otherwise. I will say, I mean, if one of the if between the Hawks and the Bulls, who would I rather see face Boston the first round? I would rather see Atlanta face Boston.
Yes,
the first
big
round.
time.
I would love
the
to see
Bulls
a
would be down 40
there.
at the half in one of those games. if it's them.
I think they would get smoked.
Well, let's also look at this because that's the other part of these playing games, right? We talked a lot in the West about, all right, who wins, who gets OKC, who gets Denver. Celtics, Knicks are the two teams awaiting these play-in winners. Does Miami or Philly specifically worry you if you're Boston? Does one of those teams, strike any fear into you of a first round upset?
I would not want to face Philly because I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess if that's sort of contingent on them like losing the first play-in game, and then the fact that Philly has just been so good since Embiid came back again, Boston in theory they have Porzingis they can throw on him, and they have at Horford, and they can double team, and they can do whatever, and I think they can be fine and they can win. I mean, to me, this is like Celtics are going to the NBA Finals. I've thought that for I don't even know how long. I mean, probably since December. I'm just like, this is the team. That's it. But I think I'd be more scared of Philly just for the top end talent. But I get why people might not want to face Miami.
Yeah, I'm looking at who's Philly's beat. So they've won 8 in a row. Embiid has played in 5 of those games. The winning streak started the last day of March. They beat Toronto. I don't think we need to talk more about who Toronto has. They then beat OKC, who I know for sure did not have SGA, and I'm pretty sure they didn't have Jalen Williams for that game either. They won in Miami on April 4th. That's a good win. Not going to take anything away from that. Butler played, Adebayo played. That was a close game. Sixers came out on top. They beat Memphis. They beat the Spurs. They beat the Pistons. They beat the Magic. They beat the Nets. I don't know. I'm not ready to just say they're back. And like we talked about with James Harden, who's to say that Joel Embiid is going to play like this in the playoffs? It has literally never happened. He's good for like one good game a series. Like that worries me a ton. And if there's one team that on paper has the size to combat Embiid, it's Porzingis, it's Horford, it's whoever, Luke Cornett, it's Xavier Tillman. Like they have bodies, they have fouls to burn against Joel Embiid. If I'm Boston, I would rather play Philly than Miami. Like there's something about the Miami Heat that much like we sit here as Bucks fans and say, no, I don't care. I don't want to play Miami. I think Boston has to feel the same way.
Yeah. I mean, as much as I would be scared of Philly because of the top end talent with Embiid and Maxey, especially after maybe Embiid gets a little break here. Kind of depends how these things shake out. But I think we aren't. I think we might be underrated Miami a little bit in terms of the Rozier trade because we haven't seen that much of Rozier and Hero together. Hero was hurt. Rozier missed some time. Since the trade deadline, Miami has the best defense in the NBA.
That's what I'm saying.
109 defensive rating, and they have the 4th best net rating overall since the trade deadline. And their guys haven't even been completely healthy. So, I do think Terry Rozier is better than I think most people think. He meshed with the team. He's good on defense. I just am expecting a little too much out of Embiid with his health, and maybe I'm giving them too much credit for the 8-game win streak. But both neither of these teams are going to be a walkover.
No, I mean, I would be very surprised if Boston ultimately loses the series against either team, but we got to have the discussion. And Miami's a better team than the one that beat Boston last year, I think. And Boston's also a better
Oh
team.
yeah.
That's the other side of this. I mean, Miami has added Rozier. They made that entire run without Tyler Hero. I think that's something that goes a little undercovered. Now, is Caleb Martin going to play like that for a month straight? Probably not. He hasn't done it during the regular season whatsoever. But you add somebody like Jaquez, who's kind of this playoff wild card. Like I feel like he could have like a Kelly Olynyk moment at some point during these playoffs. And yeah, I mean, again, the other side of this is Boston didn't have Derek White, they didn't have Drew Holiday, they didn't have Kristaps Porzingis. Like those are three pretty big things we need to mention here. So again, I'd be very surprised if Boston loses in round one. That would be one of the all-time shocking first-round upsets. I don't care who you end up playing, even if it's a team like Miami or Philly who feels more like a 5 seed than an 8 seed. The other thing with Boston is the bracket broke their way, man. We could talk about Cavs Magic, what a war that's going to be. I mean, I think Boston's going to have a tougher first-round series regardless, unless it's Hawks Bulls. They're going to have a tougher first-round series in all likelihood than they will second-round series. Like they should be able to breeze through Cleveland or Orlando.
Yeah, I think I'm really conflicted about Cleveland, but Boston should be able to just, I think, smoke them. The thing is, Cleveland to me feels like a souped up Atlanta, where it's like I like everybody on this team. I like Jared Allen, even though he got exposed by Mitchell Robinson last year in the playoffs. I like Evan Mobley. I like Max Strus, Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell. But for some reason, some of it's some of it. Hey, why not? Some of it is the spacing and the Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland. Maybe their fits kind of meh. But and so yeah, if it goes 6 games, okay. But I agree. It's the bracket for Boston. It's set up. It's just set up for them.
All right, we'll wrap it here. Fun time previewing all these games, all these upcoming series with you, Alex. Again, we'll have Lakers, Pels, Warriors, Kings on Tuesday, Heat, Sixers, Hawks, Bulls on Wednesday. No games Thursday, and then the play-in finals, I guess. The last play-in games are on Friday night. Playoffs start on Saturday. We'll have you on the RotoWire Fantasy channel later this week, doing a full preview for 15 or 20 minutes with me and Jeff. You and I will be back on the RotoWire NBA show. If you've been listening to us on SiriusXM NBA, schedule will be a little bit more spotty over the next few weeks. We'll be on nights when there are games, and some nights there'll be some of those early starts that bump us. But you can listen to us on Tuesday and Friday this week, previewing the play-in games, and then should have a full slate of shows next week as we get into the first round. Alex, good stuff as always, man. We'll talk soon.